Close your eyes for a moment. It's the summer of 1967. Gordon Lightfoot is playing softly on the radio. Your mother's hanging laundry in the backyard while the smell of Sunday roast drifts through the screen door. Somewhere down the street, kids are playing road hockey until the streetlights come on. Nobody's locked the door. Nobody needs to. This was Canada in the 1960s, a country where a factory worker could buy a house on a single income, where neighbors knew your name, your kids' names, and what time you left for work every morning, where the future looked so bright you almost had to squint. And while we were living this quiet, confident life, something very different was happening south of the border. America was burning, cities in flames, assassinations, riots in the streets. But Canada was throwing the biggest party the world had ever seen. This is the story of Canada's calm and comforting 1960s, the decade we became who we are, the Canada we were becoming. But to understand why 1967 mattered so much, you have to understand the Canada that came before it. The Canada of the early 1960s was built on foundations that seem almost mythical now. Your parents had survived the Depression, maybe the war. They knew what real hardship felt like, and they raised you with those lessons burned into your bones. Waste nothing, work hard, look out for your neighbors. And in return, the country gave them something remarkable, a chance to build a real life on a single income, a home, a car, maybe even a cottage up north. The future wasn't something to fear. It was something to build. Jobs were plentiful and secure in those days. You could walk into a factory on Monday and start work by Friday. Pensions weren't promises that might be broken. They were guarantees. You worked, you retired, you were okay. Community meant something real back then. Neighbors weren't just people who happened to live nearby. They were the backup when your parents weren't home. They were the ones who bring a casserole when someone got sick, shovel your driveway before you woke up, and keep an eye on your kids when you weren't looking. Nobody locked their doors because there was nothing to lock out. Canada was still finding its voice in those years, still tied to Britain, but loosening those bonds. Not quite American, but becoming something distinctly ourselves. Something was shifting in the national consciousness. We just didn't have words for it yet. A day in the life. And if you grew up in that world, you remember what daily life actually felt like. Morning started with the gentle clink of glass bottles on the porch. The milkman had come before dawn, leaving milk so fresh the cream pushed up the cardboard cap like a little frozen tower. Inside, coffee percolated on the stove. Not a machine, just the old stovetop kind that made the whole kitchen smell like morning. Your mom might be in her housecoat, packing lunches. Your dad had the newspaper open, checking the hockey scores from last night before heading off to work. The radio played CBC softly in the background. Maybe the news, maybe the Happy Gang if the timing was right. If you remember running out in your pajamas to grab those milk bottles before they froze solid, you remember a Canada that moved at the speed of relationship, not transaction. You walked to school. Every day, rain, snow, that March slush that soaked through your boots. Didn't matter. Maybe it was a mile, maybe more if you lived rural. No one drove you unless the blizzard was biblical. You'd meet friends along the way, your breath visible in the cold, your mittens already damp by the time you reached the schoolyard. And somehow you survived. More than survived, you barely thought about it. That was just how you got places. After school, you belonged to the neighborhood. There was one rule, and every kid in Canada knew it. Be home when the street lights came on. Until then, you were free. Road hockey in the cul-de-sac. Nets dragged aside every time a car came by. Car. Game on. Bikes without helmets. Ridden until your legs burned. Forts in the woods made from whatever lumber you could scavenge. Nobody worried because they didn't need to. Mrs. Patterson would yell at you if you got too loud. Mr. LeBlanc would fix your bike chain without being asked. The whole street was watching, and that was enough. Dinner happened at 6 o'clock, not around 6. At 6, the whole family squeezed around the chrome-legged kitchen table. No TV in the background, no phones buzzing. Just forks scraping plates and someone asking about your day. And you'd actually answer with real details, because there was nothing else competing for your attention but Saturday nights. Saturday nights were sacred. Hockey night in Canada. The whole country tuned in at the same moment. From Vancouver Island to Newfoundland. You'd sit on the floor close to the TV, probably on shag carpet that had seen better days. And when Foster Hewitt's voice called out, he shoots, he scores. The house erupted. If you remember gathering around that one TV, cheering for the Leafs or the Canadians while your dad yelled at the referee, you remember when hockey wasn't just a sport. It was us. It was how we knew we were Canadian. Shopping meant community, too. The corner store where the owner knew your name and slipped you an extra piece of penny candy while you decided between licorice whips and jawbreakers. Eaton's downtown, where families spent Saturday afternoons browsing, stopping at the lunch counter for grilled cheese and milkshakes. The Christmas catalog, thick as a phone book, arriving every fall, so you could circle your dreams in pencil and hope. Summer meant freedom on four wheels. Piling into the station wagon, windows down because air conditioning was for Americans, heading north. Muskoka if you were in Ontario. The Okanagan out west. Maybe all the way to PEI if your dad had the patience and vacation time. The cottage wasn't fancy. Just a cabin by the water with screen doors that never quite closed right and beds that sagged in the middle. But those days on the dock, diving in, climbing out, diving in again until your skin pruned and your shoulders burned pink, those were the days you remember forever. What was your family summer escape? The lake? A relative's farm? A cabin in the Laurentians? Tell me in the comments. While America burned, this was the Canada of the early 1960s. Calm, confident, comfortable. But by 1967, something even bigger was happening. Canada wasn't just living well. Canada was announcing itself to the world. Now, let me take you south of the border for a moment, because you can't truly understand what Canada was building without understanding what America was going through by the mid-1960s. The United States was on fire, sometimes literally that JFK assassinated in 63, Malcolm X in 65. Then what's exploded? 34 people dead, an entire neighborhood in flames. Detroit in 67, 43 dead. The National Guard rolling tanks through American streets, soldiers with rifles patrolling past suburban homes, and Vietnam. 500,000 American boys sent to a jungle war they couldn't win, while their country tore itself apart over whether they should be there at all. Martin Luther King shot in Memphis. Bobby Kennedy shot in Los Angeles. Cities burning from coast to coast. This was America in the 1960s. Chaos, division, blood in the streets. And Canada? Canada was throwing a birthday party. Not just any party. The biggest celebration the world had ever seen. While Detroit burned, Montreal built islands in the St. Lawrence River. While Americans buried their leaders, Canadians raised a new flag. Something uniquely, unmistakably ours. We weren't ignoring what was happening south of the border. We watched it on the CBC every night. But somehow, in that decade, Canada chose a different path. We chose optimism. We chose building. We chose each other. April 27, 1967. Expo 67 opened in Montreal, if you were there. Or if your family saved up for months to make the trip, you never forgot it. 60 countries had come to Canada. Pavilions rose from islands that hadn't existed a few years before. The geodesic dome gleaming in the sun. Habitat 67 stacked apartments looking like the future itself had landed on Canadian soil. Over 50 million people visited that summer. Canada's entire population was only 20 million. The world had come to us, and they liked what they saw. Walking through Expo 67, as a kid felt like stepping into tomorrow. Every pavilion was a window into another culture, another way of living. The colors, the architecture, the food you'd never tasted, the languages you didn't understand but somehow felt connected to that you'd never experienced anything like it. Most Canadians hadn't. And over it all, that flag, the maple leaf, it had only been adopted in 1965 after months of fierce debate in Parliament. Some had wanted to keep the old British symbols. Some thought the red and white was too simple, too plain. But watching it fly over Expo 67, watching it represent Canada to 60 nations and 50 million visitors, it felt right. It felt like us. Not British. Not American. Something new. something we built ourselves. Canada was turning 100 years old, and we were just getting started. If you visited Expo 67 or dreamed of going, share your memory in the comments. I want to hear what you remember about that magical summer, what they don't tell you. But here's what most people don't know about the 1960s, the stories behind the stories, the things that made this decade even more remarkable than the surface memories suggest. While Canada was celebrating its centennial, thousands of Americans were crossing the border, not for vacation, but for survival. Between 30,000 and 40,000 young American men came to Canada to escape the Vietnam draft. They arrived in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, looking over their shoulders, wondering if they'd made a terrible mistake. What they found surprised them. Canada didn't just tolerate them. Canada welcomed them. Churches sponsored them. Families took them in. Communities across the country helped them start new lives in a peaceful nation. Many of these men never went back. They became teachers, professors, artists, business owners. They became Canadians. One draft dodger later said, "Canada didn't just give me refuge. Canada gave me a life." Now let's talk numbers for a moment, because the math tells a story that words alone cannot. In 1965, the average house in Toronto cost about $15,000. The average salary was around $4,000 a year. That means a house costs less than 4 years of salary. Today, that same Toronto house, same neighborhood, same size, would cost well over $1 million. At today's average salary, that's more than 20 years of income. Your parents weren't imagining it. Your grandparents weren't exaggerating. Life really was more affordable. A teacher, a factory worker, a bank clerk. Any of them could buy a home, raise a family, take summer vacations, and retire with a real pension. What did your parents pay for their first house? Drop the price and the year in the comments. Let's see how things have changed across the country. And here's one more thing most people forget. Universal health care wasn't handed to us on a silver platter. When Saskatchewan introduced Medicare in 1962, the province's doctors went on strike for 23 days. They said it would destroy medicine. They said it couldn't possibly work. The province held firm. The doctors came back. Medicare worked. And by 1968, the rest of Canada was following Saskatchewan's lead. Today, universal health care is woven into our national identity, something that makes us proud, something that separates us from the American system. But it didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen easily. People fought for it. Tommy Douglas believed health care was a right, not a privilege. Saskatchewan proved him right, and Canada became better for it. How the 1960s made U.S. All of this, the celebrations, the calm, the opportunities, it shaped a generation. Maybe it shaped you. The 1960s didn't just happen to you. They made you who you are. Every winter walk to school through snow up to your knees taught you something about perseverance. You didn't call it resilience back then. You just called it Tuesday. Every summer job, paper routes at 12, babysitting at 14, baling hay until your hands blistered, taught you that money was earned, never given. You learned to solve problems because no one was coming to solve them for you. Your bike broke, you fixed it. Your toys stopped working. You opened it up and figured out why. If you got in trouble at school, you got in trouble at home too. Double jeopardy, no appeals. Remember when getting in trouble at school meant you'd face it twice at home? That was real accountability. That was how character got built. But it wasn't just about toughness. The 1960s taught you about genuine connection. You knew your neighbors because you had to, because they were the backup when your parents were at work, because they'd bring a casserole when your mother was sick, shovel your driveway before dawn, and watch your kids like they were their own. Family dinner wasn't something you scheduled around activities. It was just dinner. Every night. Same time. Same table. You talked because there was nothing else to do. You listened because someone was speaking directly to you. Sundays were for church, or for drives and nowhere in particular, or for visiting relatives who lived close enough that you didn't need to plan a week ahead. None of it felt exceptional at the time. All of it was irreplaceable. These bonds didn't just make life pleasant. They made life possible. They made communities work. They made you who you are. And for some Canadians, the 1960s meant something even more profound. It meant arrival. Thousands of families came to Canada in that decade, from Italy, Portugal, Greece, Poland, Hungary, the Caribbean, and beyond. They came from countries still recovering from war, from villages where opportunity had dried up, from places where the future looked dark and uncertain. What they found in Canada was almost too good to believe. Jobs were genuinely available. Homes were honestly affordable. Their children could become anything they were willing to work toward. The promise was real. They built Little Italy and Greek Town and Little Portugal. They learned to love hockey, to tolerate winter, to navigate new language and new customs while keeping their own traditions alive. They watched their children become Canadian, more Canadian with each passing year, while still honoring where they came from. If your parents or grandparents arrived in the 1960s, they found a calm we've been describing. They found a country that welcomed hard work and actually rewarded it. If your family immigrated in the 60s, tell me where they came from and what they found. I'd love to hear your story in the comments. That generation, the one that grew up in the calm 1960s, or arrived there seeking something better, they built the Canada we inherited. They built the schools and hospitals. They coached the hockey teams and ran the community centers. They raised kids who raised kids, passing down values they sometimes didn't even know they were transmitting. Finish your plate. Help your neighbor. Work hard. Be honest. Show up on time. Keep your word. These weren't lectures delivered from on high. They were just how things were done. You absorbed it like breathing, and you breathed it out as parents and grandparents yourselves. They're still here, many of them. Your parents, your grandparents, the ones who remember what Canada felt like when the world was quiet and the future was bright. What remains? So what's left of that world? More than you might think, and perhaps less than we might wish. Some things from the 1960s are still with us. Universal health care, the thing those doctors said couldn't work, is now woven into our national identity. The maple leaf flag flies from coast to coast to coast. Expo 67's landmarks still stand in Montreal, monuments to a time when Canada dreamed big and actually delivered on those dreams. Hockey night in Canada still plays on Saturday nights, even if most of us watch on our own screens now instead of gathering around one television in the living room. And the values? The ones about community, hard work, looking out for your neighbors? They're still there, living in the people who learned them, living perhaps in you, but let's be honest with each other. Much has changed. Houses that cost 3 years' salary now cost 20. The corner store became a chain. The milkman disappeared decades ago. Neighbors became strangers in many places, hidden behind tall fences and busy schedules that leave no room for borrowing a cup of sugar. We're more connected than ever, and somehow lonelier than we've ever been. We have unlimited entertainment in our pockets, but we've lost the ability to be comfortable with boredom, to sit with our own thoughts, to let time stretch out empty and discover something meaningful to fill it. The calm isn't entirely gone, but it's harder to find. You have to fight for it now in ways nobody had to fight before. This isn't about wanting to reverse time. The 1960s weren't perfect for everyone. Not everyone experienced the calm the same way. Progress has come since then. Doors have opened that were firmly closed. Barriers have fallen that should never have existed in the first place. But something was there that's worth remembering, worth learning from, worth maybe trying to rebuild in our own way, in our own time. Community. Trust, the sense that tomorrow could genuinely be better than today, the understanding that we're all in this together. The 1960s didn't have all the answers, but they asked them the right questions. So let me take you back one more time. One last moment. Close your eyes again that it's the summer of 1967. Gordon Lightfoot is on the radio, singing about the Canadian Railroad trilogy. The screen door is banging gently in the warm breeze. Somewhere down the street, kids are playing road hockey, kick the can, whatever game they invented that morning that nobody's locked the door. Nobody needs to. Canada is turning 100 years old, and the whole country feels like it's just getting started. Expo 67 is packed with visitors from around the world who came to see what we'd built. The maple leaf flag is flying proudly. The future stretches out ahead, bright and full of possibility. And you were there. If you remember any of this, the milkman at dawn, the streetlight curfew, hockey night in Canada on the one TV in the living room, the walk to school through February blizzards, the summers at the cottage. You're a part of something larger than yourself. You're part of the generation that lived through Canada's calmest, most confident decade. You watched us become who we are. You helped build what we have today. These memories aren't just yours. They're ours. They belong to all of us. Share this with someone who remembers, with your brother or sister who walked to school beside you, with your kids who need to understand where their parents came from, with anyone who wonders what Canada used to feel like when the world was gentle and the future was bright. Drop your own memory in the comments. I want to hear your story. And subscribe for more Canada Storied. We're just getting started.